And good evening, everyone. We start here tonight with the immigration debate. What's happening at the southern border is one of the top issues for voters as we're heading into elections this fall for control of Congress and also the White House. Over the weekend, we got our first look at a new bipartisan bill to try to address the record flow of migrants to our south. If migrant encounters hit a certain level, the government would have to declare an emergency and deny entry to anyone at the border for at least 14 days, though critics say there are some loopholes in there. The bill also makes it more difficult to seek asylum, though $20 billion in new funding would help to speed up the processing of asylum claims, also put more agents at the border, and boost screening to try to keep fentanyl out of this country. Well, today we heard from local Republican Congressman Nick Langworthy, who is opposed to this bill, and Democratic Governor Kathy Hochul, who supports it.
It is absolutely essential that we get these changes. Number one, changes in the asylum law, make them tougher. Number two, money for localities and states, $1.4 billion. New York State would receive a share of this.
It does not end catch and release policies that have been a major contributor to this crisis, and instead gives asylum seekers automatic work permits. That further fuels this problem. It's like putting a neon sign saying, "Come on in, we're open for business."
And tonight, we have two voices on this topic. Jerry Zrimsky covers Washington for the Buffalo News and is a lecturer at the University of Maryland. And Jennifer Rizzo Choi is the executive director of the International Institute of Buffalo. It's really great to have both of you here tonight. And I do want to start here with the politics and what we know about the specifics of this bill and kind of what to make of it and how this will proceed. Jerry, I'll start with you here. And sort of, I guess, to further complicate this, the package, I should mention, also includes aid to Ukraine and to Israel. But on the immigration issue here, conservative Senator James Lankford actually negotiated this. He called it a once-in-a-generation opportunity to try to deal with this problem we've talked about for so long. Yet Republicans are kind of lining up left and right to express their opposition to it. What has happened?
Well, what has happened is that Donald Trump opposes the bill, and Republicans don't really want to give the Democrats any solution to this huge problem that they're facing in an election year. So it's very noble what Senator Lankford has done here. And in another time, it might be a bill that would have some legs in the Congress. But during an election year, it's always notoriously difficult to pass major legislation. And then you compound it by having a Republican candidate in Donald Trump who is so vehemently critical of immigration. So it really does look like this bill is a non-starter in the House, and it may even run into problems in the Senate, given that some Senate Republicans as well have qualms about the measure.
Yeah, Jerry, when we talk about a potential path forward, as you mentioned, the House, it does not seem to have much support there, but it's in the Senate right now. Republican leader Mitch McConnell has come out in support of this. I mentioned Senator Lankford, who is a conservative, who is, trying to rally support around this. If somehow it gets to 60 votes in the Senate with almost all Democrats or all Democrats and enough Republicans, and it builds support there, do you see a scenario in which that could then move over to the House and put some pressure to try to pass this just as a way? Maybe some think it's not perfect, but it's something.
I think it's really quite doubtful. And the reason I think it's quite doubtful is because the margin that the Republicans have in holding the House right now is very, very narrow. And I think that Mike Johnson, the Speaker, also knows what's happened to the last three Speakers of the House under Republican control. Their departures were not exactly pretty. So he's not going to want to inflame the far right wing. And bringing this bill to the floor would inflame the far right wing. So I don't see how it even gets to the floor, much less gets passed.
Finally, Jerry, are there any parts to this bill? And I mentioned just a few of the bullet points there off the top of the show. It is very complicated. There's a lot to it. But are there any parts of it that you think could turn into a bill that could have a chance at passage? Or do we just accept at this point that nothing's going to happen until we get through the next elections?
I think it's much more likely that action would take place after the election. But remember, this is an issue that Congress has been punting on and refusing to deal with for decades. That being the case, I don't see any piece of this really making its way forward right now. And frankly, the fact that Ukraine funding is included in this bill only makes matters more complicated because so many of the mega Republicans in the House don't want to be funding Ukraine anymore. So there are just inordinate challenges to getting this passed in the House. And even if it got pared down to just a narrow immigration measure, I think we might see some Democrats peeling off too, because no matter what the Republicans say about this bill, it's actually tougher on asylum and on immigration than Democrats have been willing to go in the past.
Yeah, no doubt. Jerry Zaremski is Washington Enterprise reporter for the Buffalo News and a lecturer at the University of Maryland. Jerry, great to see you as always. Thank you.
Great to see you. Thank you.
All right, we continue the conversation now with the International Institute of Buffalo's Executive Director, Jennifer Rizzo Choi. Great to have you back as well. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
You deal with asylees, also refugees, migrants writ large all the time. In your position, how are you reading this bill that's before you now?
I think it's a good progress step forward, to be honest. It's not going to appease everybody, let's be honest, but it's addressing things. First of all, it's looking at finding a way to address people getting asylum quickly. Right now we have people waiting years, 5, 10 years for a decision, which makes life very hard for refugees or anybody that's in that limbo. This is saying it would give an answer within 6 months. It is also structuring it so that people go through a port of entry so we have lawful entry, and that would hopefully disrupt the coyote business of smuggling people over. There are detriments though. I mean, if you enter not through a port of entry illegally, they will turn you around. It's ending the catch and release policy that's been in place right now, which is saying that right now if you did get caught through an illegal entry, you were allowed to stay and try to make your case. So there's aspects here, but I think there's real good progress here, and reckoning that with the fact that so many people have crossed in the last year and they haven't gone forward in the system, we do have to do something.
Yeah, you talked about the backlog there and how long it is taking to process these claims. And we know that the percentages are oftentimes low, the number of people who actually end up at the end of the day qualifying. This bill would make it more difficult to apply for asylum. I imagine you, as someone who is an advocate for those people who are in many cases fleeing very dangerous situations, to make it more difficult on them. But is that sort of the compromise that it's going to take at this point to fix what everyone acknowledges is broken?
I mean, there have been, I don't know, 6 or 7 bipartisan attempts to get legislation across in the last 2 decades, and it hasn't happened. And getting something across is important as long as we are safeguarding humanitarian rights and the legal right to asylum. So there are some barriers in here. It's going to make it harder to get. I am heartened by some measures, like, for instance, they're looking at providing government-funded counsel for children under age 13. Up until now, I mean, nonprofits like mine can do it, but if you're a kid and there's no legal aid attorney, you're representing yourself in court, and you could be 6 months old. Wow. So they're looking at some things to try to make it fair. It's silent on other things. At this point, just doing something to move forward, to at least put a structure in place, would be better, and then you could go back later and try and fix other things. But it's so hard to get just agreement on this in our own legislature that, you know, I would like to at least see this move forward in a way that provides meaningful answers for the clients that we serve.
Finally, you talk about funding as well. New York State obviously has spent a lot of money, as so many migrants have been bused from the southern border to New York City and then subsequently to our region. There is some money in this bill, but not a lot. What did you make of that part of it? I only have a little bit of time.
Sure. You know, the funding is not enough to really help with all of the humanitarian support from what I can see. And the states like New York City have really had to step in and make a difference there. And I think they're looking at that timeline and hoping that it's shortened so that they're not paying for food and rent and things if people can get an answer, get a work permit, and move forward. So I'm guessing a lot of people will have relief on that if it were to pass.
Yeah, I mean, if you can process asylum claims in a very short period of time, you're not paying that money to house people and to take care of them.
But they have to fund it. They have to fund the government judges and adjudicators and prosecutors to do it.
Jennifer Rizzo Choi is the Executive Director of the International Institute of Buffalo. Thank you for being part of this important conversation. Good to see you.
Thanks.